All right, good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here I'm so excited to be here today and to be talking with all of you about how we can tackle socioeconomic bias in machine learning. Algorithmic bias affects people daily, disproportionately affecting women, people of color, and widening socioeconomic gaps. But before I dive too much into details and the results and how the work that we did can actually help close these gaps, these socioeconomic gaps, I want to acknowledge the amazing team that made this possible. This was an awesome collaboration involving a number of different individuals and organizations. This was work that was featured at NeurIPS in a paper called the Dollar Street Dataset. You'll notice I'm the last author on that paper, so I'm the idea person, and I just want to give an amazing shout out to the people that made this possible and the diverse team that we had. In particular, for Sunya, Kirtan, this was their first academic paper ever, their first research that they ever did. And as you can see, it was a team effort, even with those individuals, involving their entire family and their passion for machine learning and for having an impact. In terms of the organizations, Coactive, a startup which I am the CEO of, was involved in creating the data set, executing it, and organizing everything. Harvard University was eminently involved in the research and setting the direction and advising on all aspects of the work here. MLCommons is an international nonprofit which took on the responsibility of being the host for the data set and for the work that we did. And then last but certainly not least is Gapminder. Gapminder is a Swedish NGO. They do a number of different projects, but in particular, Gapminder is responsible for creating the Dollar Street Dataset. Now, the Dollar Street Dataset, the Dollar Street Project was a project aimed at combating human bias through photos across income and borders. Now, looking at everyone here in this room, and sorry if I have to pause or adjust, I'm a little bit tall for this microphone. Now, looking at this room, many of us might think that we're, in the middle of the bell curve in terms of socioeconomic status, middle or, high part of the bell curve. However, when you think about not just in the United States, not just here in the Bay Area, not just in San Francisco, but you actually think globally about where do we all sit on the socioeconomic curve in the world, I'm pretty confident that everyone that's in this room, if you purchase a ticket to this conference, you're actually in the top 1%. You're in the top 1% when we think globally in terms of socioeconomic status. Yet, for most people, we don't realize that. We don't appreciate that we are at the top 1% and that our lives, our everyday life, actually looks very, very different on this global socioeconomic road. And just to demonstrate that, the Dollar Street Project was amazing in the fact that they took tens of thousands of families, they went to tens of thousands of families around the world in different socioeconomic statuses, and they took photos of household items in order for us to get a picture into what life really looks like when we think globally. And as an example of that, and really combat human bias, which I want to bold and underscore, that this is really targeted at human bias, the bias that we all have in our room or in our heads. So for example, if we think of something even as simple as a toothbrush, this is probably what comes to mind. A nice toothbrush in the bathroom and a nice cup sink right there. But in actuality, when we think globally about socioeconomic status and families around the world, when we think about this toothbrush, this is the far right side in terms of what is the experience for families around the world. And in fact, there's a massive number of people that live on socioeconomic status of as little as $73 per month. Like for example, in Rwanda in the far left, where for them, a toothbrush and brushing their teeth is as simple as, just a brush and a cup of water in the wilderness, effectively. Another example, when we think about toys, now I'm a big gamer, so when I think of toys, I think of a PlayStation 5. A game console and controllers and, sports. But when we think globally about what are toys and how people have fun, we see a very different picture. We see that PlayStation 5, that video game console, that's again something that's available to the 1% of us in this room. And when we think globally about it, when we think about the people that are the worst off or that have the least socioeconomic status, the world is very different. When we look at a family that's making less than $100 a month, the picture becomes very different. We have broken toys, abandoned toys, our garbage our garbage potentially, or even things as simple as rocks to create games to play with. So this amazing project that the Gapminder organization did in order to mitigate human bias was a dramatic success in opening the eyes of individuals and people around the world to what life is actually like for the global 99%, and not just all of us that are in this room. However, humans aren't alone in having this bias. When we think about algorithmic bias, it's deeply connected to the biases that we hold as human beings. And that the human biases that we have can actually get absorbed by AI models and systems. Everything from the systematic and human bias layers, actually that's what's underneath this kind of tip of the iceberg when we talk about algorithmic or computational or statistical biases. Underneath that is actually the world that we live in, the data that we provide to these models so that they can make predictions. And, those biases, if they're contained, if we're applying a model in a very, controlled environment and controlled use case where, the biases that it's picking up are only impacting other people that have that kind of live in that same world or in that kind of narrow definition that the data is trained on, that might be okay. But in actuality, now more than ever, when we think about AI, it's impacting people around the world. And in fact, AI affects all of us globally. And actually, when we think about automation and technology proliferation worldwide, it's actually, the companies that it's the countries that have the lowest socioeconomic status for their people that are actually the ones that are going to be most impacted by AI, by automation, and by technology. Especially when we think about their livelihoods, the work that they do, and things like that. Everything from, day-to-day life, the way that they access information, to also they're critical in creating our data sets, creating labeling, things like that. But unfortunately, even though that AI impacts everyone and at a scale that is never seen before when we think about just the worldwide adoption of it. And here I'm going to do a quick plug for an amazing book by Catherine O'Neill called Weapons of Mass Destruction, which really talk about kind of this problem and the scale that AI can operate at and how it can amplify our biases beyond the populations I was trained on, but actually impact the world and actually have kind of unintended consequences. And the problem here is when we think about the data that AI is trained on, it's not representative. It's not representative of the people that are impacted by AI. It's not represented at the global scale that we're talking about. When we look at training data that's sourced from the internet, 33% of it is from the United States of America. And the other 60% of that data comes from 6 countries, leaving 7% of data, internet training data, to represent the rest of the world. The rest of the 99% of people globally, despite the fact that they're going to be the ones that are the most impacted by AI and automation. So that was the initial inspiration for the Dollar Street Dataset. We saw the impact that Gapminder had with the Dollar Street project in combating human bias. And we drew the parallel to the problems that we're facing with machine bias, with algorithmic bias, and with this widespread adoption of AI, and saw an opportunity for us to leverage the work that they created in creating the Dollar Street project and the amazing website that they created to visualize this socioeconomic road that we all live on, that we could actually turn that into a machine learning data set and make it easy for practitioners and for researchers to leverage that data to help evaluate, mitigate, and improve their models in terms of bias. Now, that's a simple idea on the surface of it, but the actual process, the thing that makes it hard, is to actually do it in the right way. Now, the Gapminder folks did the incredibly hard work of going to tens of thousands of families, or going to thousands of families around the world and capturing these household items. But in order to do it the right way, especially now that we live in a world where more than ever we care about data privacy and the rights of individuals, and especially with a global sense of GDPR and things like that, what we did is that we wanted to make sure and leverage the Gapminder's work here to make sure that the families had consented to this type of use, that it was actually freely available, that we could actually license out this data to people around the world to appropriately train on it. And that involved, of course, all the technical stuff that many of us are familiar with, the data science efforts of processing the data and things like that. But it also involved a lot of work working with legal to figure out and understand, the consent that people had signed, years ago when the Dollar Street project was first created and the many different versions that they went through, as this is an ongoing project, figuring out which ones would allow us, which people were appropriately consented to their data being used in this way. So we went and we carefully reviewed with legal, we reviewed each one of these consent forms to make sure that it was actually right for us to release their data in this way. And that took a tremendous amount of effort and time. And, as a PhD student, as an academic, as a researcher, we often, forget about and don't appreciate all the work that goes into ethically sourcing data. And that was one of the things that we noticed that kind of kept people from actually processing this data before. And now we made it freely available through MLCommons with a Creative Commons 4 license, so anyone can go to the webpage and download the Dollar Street Dataset to evaluate and to fine-tune and mitigate bias in their models. Now, diving into a little bit of more detail about what Dollar Street captures, it's a very unique data set and a very unique project in terms of the fact that it captures unique geographical and socioeconomic information. There's 38,000 images containing 289 household items from 404 homes in 63 countries from around the world. And this data, as I mentioned, was manually collected and curated and verified by hiring photographers and sending them out to these families and these homes in these different countries around the world. It includes homes that actually have no internet access, actually capturing a life that, for many of us, couldn't be represented in any other way in ML training data that is taken from the internet. It includes household items from households with as low as $27 per month as their household income. So really capturing the full spectrum of the socioeconomic status around the world. And again, all the data is licensed under a Creative Commons 4 license, so that's freely available for use. And as we talked about, it captures a unique visual diversity. As another example, when we think of, a stove, many of us probably think of the stove from Denmark or Italy as familiar, but when we think globally, when we think about that family that's making less than $27 a month, what is a stove and the way that they cook is very, very different, as you can see in the far left on this photo. And we capture that. The Dollar Street Dataset also captures geographic representation. In comparison to the map that I showed earlier, where the vast majority of the data in ML training data sets today come from 7 countries at a max, here we have over 63 countries represented. The distribution of the data in this data set is much more evenly distributed across countries, across major continents, including Africa and Asia, in addition to America and Europe. And then also, it represents a tremendous amount of socioeconomic diversity, having everything from, households very similar to probably many of us in this room, all the way down to, again, households making less than $100 a month, with the men being $26.99, the median being a household monthly income of $685, and then the maximum being a household income of $20,000 per month in USD. And the amazing thing is, or the first kind of insight, we found that performance, when we thought about the highest quartile performance, was around 57% in terms of top 5 accuracy, taking state-of-the-art models at that time, off-the-shelf models, and training it on that. However, when we looked at the lowest quartile, the lowest socioeconomic quartile, we saw that that performance dropped from 57% top 5 accuracy to an average of 18% top 5 accuracy across these state-of-the-art models, which is really troubling and really kind of captures, just the socioeconomic gap when we think about these models that are the state-of-the-art, the models that are the foundation for people and for production applications today. But fortunately, we can actually do something about that. We showed that actually if you fine-tune on this data, if you take a subset of it, and then you train it, and then you test on a held-out subset, we see that all boats rise. The performance across the board raises to about 75% on average, a 50% increase for the lowest socioeconomic status, and then helps level the playing field across socioeconomic borders so that the skew is far smaller, dramatically improving performance across the board, and in particular improving performance massively for the people that are the most worse off. And it's been also really awesome and inspiring to see others use the Dollar Street Dataset in order to tackle AI bias. We published this work a little over a year ago, and it's been cited by over 50 research teams in academia, industry, and startups. But we want more. We want more people to actually be using this data set, to be thinking about algorithmic bias and tackling the socioeconomic bias that exists in machine learning models today. So when I look at everyone in this crowd, how can you support? I strongly encourage you to download the Dollar Street Dataset if you're an ML or AI researcher or practitioner working in computer vision. Try it out. Evaluate your models on the Dollar Street Dataset. See how they actually perform in the real world on this socioeconomic and geographically diverse dataset. And then use that to actually improve your performance. Be able to fine-tune on that data such that we have models that represent and can perform well for all populations rather than a population. And then reach out to us at the Dollar Street email list if you have any suggestions, any improvements. This is a living data set. And with MLCommons as a nonprofit organization working on and supporting this data set going forward, there's a lot more that we can do, a lot more improvements that can be made. And the Dollar Street project actually from Gapminder is ongoing. So we strongly encourage you to actually visit the Dollar Street project to learn more about the amazing work that they did and help support them as they continue to grow the data set, as they continue to do other amazing projects outside of the Dollar Street project to help combat bias around the world for humans and machines. And then, of course, spread the word. And with that, I also have to make one more plug about, why do this? I'm a CEO of an AI startup, and starting a company and running that is hard enough by itself. But fundamentally at Coactive, we're building multimodal AI systems to help humans and machines work together. The word coactive was chosen intentionally. You're probably familiar with proactive, reactive. Coactive means to work together concurrently. And when my co-founder and we started Coactive, we chose the word coactive, and we set up our grand vision of helping humans and machines work together, which is more important now than ever as AI is impacting more and more of our everyday life at a scale that we can't even imagine. And in order to be able to ensure that we mitigate bias, it starts by having the right people. Having people that care about this, that care about bias, care about the practical impacts and implications of AI. So we're hiring, so I encourage anyone that is an AI practitioner, researcher, or generally interested to check us out. And with that, I'll end. Thank you all, and I'll open it up for any questions. Yeah.
So Pakistan is one of the most affected countries
Mm-hmm.
to AI. How? What does it mean?
What?
What does it mean that Pakistan is one of the 6 countries most affected by AI?
Yeah, so it's, and I'll refer to the document here and the link that's included in this, but it's in talking about jobs being replaced by AI automating away labor and opportunities. When we think about Pakistan, when we think about any of the ones that are listed, it's from a labor perspective, jobs that are going to be eliminated by AI. So this can be everything from, labeling tasks to kind of more routine kind of assets. You see this with, automation from calling to any of these kind of more straightforward tasks. But there's a much better explanation in the report, but it's really in terms of the countries most affected from a jobs perspective. Thank you.
I might have missed this answer, but my question is, how do you go about collecting all this data from different countries?
Yeah, super great question. So this is where the Gapminder project and the amazing stuff that they did with Dollar Street came in. So Gapminder actually sent out, and they hired photographers, and they sent them to these countries, to these 63 countries. And then in those countries, they put out advertisements for families that would be willing to have their household items actually photographed and to be created as a part of the Dollar Street project. And as part of that, they got consent. The photographers were instructed to get consent from those families that they were photographing and making them get informed consent about the photographs and the implications of that. So the Gapminder folks, the Swedish NGO, they were responsible and did the heavy lifting and actually going out and capturing all of that data, hiring the photographers to doing it, dispatching them to those 63 countries around the world, and again, making sure that informed consent was gathered and that families were appropriately informed.
Were the families paid in any way? Were the families paid in any way?
That is a good question. And if I remember correctly, I would have to check back at the data set. I think that they avoided compensation, like direct compensation in terms of the monetary standpoint, so that families weren't coerced or feeling as though they were coerced into taking these photos. So they had to voluntarily do it. But I believe they gave them kind of some small, nominally valued gift in terms of their support. But if I remember correctly, they didn't want families to be coerced into doing this as an incentive because, if you're living on less than $100 a month, offering $20 or, an Amazon gift card or something like that is actually quite a big incentive for them.
Does that also include, the data doesn't include cost of living versus what is earned?
The data includes what is earned, and then it includes the geographical information such that you can correlate that with, or you can find out what's the cost of living within that area. But it's not directly provided in the data set.
Great questions.
Yeah.
Does anyone have more questions?
Hey, I'm Brian. I'm kind of curious. I guess the thing that resonated with me the most is if you go back to the stove slide. I guess I kind of take it for granted that if I'm Googling, how do I fix my stove or how does it work, that I'm expected to get some result resembling something like Denmark.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, okay, if someone that's in Myanmar is Googling how a stove works, they're probably going to get something similar to Denmark as well. So my question is the goal of this project to kind of be more representative of, if you use something like ChatGPT, based on geographic location, that you would get results more relevant to you? Or what is the overall vision of Dollar Street versus something like ChatGPT or stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. So the implications of the Dollar Street, or the goal of the Dollar Street data set, is to actually help with bias in all sorts of different applications. You know, ChatGPT is just one type of application in terms of information, understanding the world, but AI is increasingly being deployed in more and more sophisticated ways around the world. Everything from, you know, loan approvals to, you think about your smartphone, you know, like with this recent announcement, it's like seeing the world and like what does it see, what does it classify, how does it understand the world. Also, when we think about the photos, the things that are being generated as well, those photos, that will, like when we think about generative AI, that can have bias as well. So there's a number of different applications and a number of different ways that this data set can help make sure that these AI applications, these advances that we're creating in all aspects of our life, whether it be ChatGPT, whether it be generative AI, whether it be, you know, some other use case that we can't even think of right now, that those are actually evaluated and set up for success for all populations rather than, you know, a population.
I guess follow up, is there an expectation that usage of generative AI is proportional to would it be proportional to the amount of people distributed in the population versus distributed amongst the people who use the generative AI technology, if that makes sense?
So it kind of makes sense. You're asking, like, when we think about the people that this is going to impact AI, are the people that are impacted by AI or that are is that the same kind of like distribution in a sense?
I guess like when we think about like ChatGPT and us as the 1%, we're much more likely to be consuming generative AI, but we want representation of AI to be representative of humans as a whole, right, holistically. But the proportion is not really, it doesn't really fit. So I guess like what is the prioritization in terms of representation there?
Yeah, so ChatGPT, again, is just one AI application. And there's AI applications that are being deployed around the world that we don't know about and you might not think about. I highly recommend reading this book, Weapons of Math Destruction, which is going to do a much better job of talking about the other applications and the ways that AI can impact everyday life, even outside of the knowledge information pieces that we're using. It can influence the criminal justice system, and it can influence facial recognition, identification. It can influence loans. It can influence education. All these very core aspects of life that impact everybody. In the paper itself, we talk about there's work that shows that computer vision models actually perform worse for people of dark skin tones. There's been work or examples that have shown that production level vision APIs, when showing a picture of a hand with a dark skin tone, what they might predict as a contactless thermometer, they instead predict a class gun. So these biases, even though they can have really insidious impacts in everyday life. You think about security cameras. Increasingly, people are using security cameras, attaching that with artificial intelligence to be able to identify threats and things like that for public safety. Now imagine a world where those applications are biased. They actually don't understand what someone might consider a toothbrush, or a toy or something like that. They misunderstand that and then disproportionately impact people from lower socioeconomic statuses and backgrounds. But I think with that, I'm getting the hook. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. You're an amazing audience.